So I've made videos talking about the different things you should know to be a good axolotl owner, but I haven't talked about the most important thing you should know, which is the nitrogen cycle. A lot of people underestimate how important it is to understand the nitrogen cycle because if you don't know much about it, water will just seem like water to you. For example, could you tell me which of these glasses came from my tap versus which one came from my aquarium? I doubt it. My point is that even though they both look clean, you'd probably only want to drink out of one of those glasses. And that's because they each have completely different parameters. You just can't see them. So what is the nitrogen cycle? Well, the nitrogen cycle is the process where nitrifying bacteria will turn the waste in your aquarium into lesser and lesser toxic parameters. It's important for every aquarium, especially their filters, to have a colony of this bacteria in them because while filters do amazing for sucking up particulate matter in the aquarium, once it's been sucked up, there needs to be some bacteria there to help break it down, or else you're literally just going to be filtering all that water through that waste constantly. I don't want to scare anyone, but for cycling your first tank from scratch, it's very common for the process to take up to 2 months or longer. This is why it's so suggested to have your tank cycled before you get the animal, and it's why you'll see in a lot of Facebook groups and online forums people having to tub their animals because they didn't do this first. This can turn into a multi-month process of having to do daily water changes on your tubbed axolotl while you play with the parameters in your aquarium because while it's not hard, it can be a learning curve. Since it is a learning curve, if you're like me, you might find it helpful to watch multiple videos on the nitrogen cycle to make the vocabulary seem more natural to you. So here's some cycling tips before I really get into it. Cycling can go a lot faster in heated water, so it can be beneficial to add a heater for the process. Just make sure you remove it once you put the axolotl in. Larger tanks and larger filters are a lot easier to keep cycled. Substrates are also an awesome home for your beneficial bacteria colony, but unfortunately because axolotls don't have a huge list of substrates that are safe for them, a lot of people do bare bottom tanks like I do. If you're going the bare bottom route, I would suggest having at least 1 or 2 sponge filters in there as extra places for your beneficial bacteria to live, just because you don't have that additional substrate for them. I like to look at nitrites as I and nitrates as A, so that I don't confuse them because they are completely different steps of the cycle. Nitrates are the last part of the cycle and they're only toxic once they get to about 40 parts per million or more, which is when you will have to do a water change. This will be about once a week, but if you have a planted tank, you might be able to get a little bit more time in between those water changes because plants eat nitrates. Without plants in the tank, you're going to see them rise a little bit faster. You're going to have to do a little bit more work. If you're dealing with a stuck or stalled cycle, it can be caused by having too much ammonia, having your other parameters completely off the charts, or having a pH that is under 7. This process in a fishless cycle shouldn't require any water changes until the very end to bring the nitrates down, but if you do find that any of your other parameters are just off the charts, you can do up to a 50% water change. Just don't touch your filter media and don't scrub anything in your tanks. And make sure you redose your ammonia for the amount of water that you replaced so that you don't end up starving your bacteria and losing progress. Now, chlorine will kill the bacteria that you're trying to grow, so make sure that you are dechlorinating water before you add it. I suggest Sechem Prime, but there are others that can work with axolotls. Just be sure to look into them first, though, because there are a lot that contain aloe, which is toxic to axolotls. This is the same reason why it's suggested to wash your filter media using tank water rather than under the tap to avoid killing your bacteria colony. Testing strips aren't very accurate. I would suggest getting a liquid test kit from API. And for an ammonia source, I recommend ordering Dr. Tim's ammonia online. So here's a flowchart that you can screenshot that I find really handy in explaining the cycling process. But for now, I'll explain it in a way that helped me because I haven't really seen it explained in this way and it really would have helped me. So I like to look at the nitrogen cycle as if the colony of bacteria you're trying to grow is a bunch of tiny little pets that you can't see. And those tiny little pets eat ammonia to grow. Ammonia is the byproduct of waste in the aquarium, and pretty much to anything living in the aquarium other than the bacteria you're trying to grow, it will be toxic. So in order to start growing the colony of bacteria that's going to help convert your ammonia into less toxic parameters, you're going to need a source of ammonia. This is where your different cycling methods will come in. The two main cycling methods you'll see suggested online are fishless cycling and fish-in cycling. The difference between these two methods basically comes down to whether you're okay with sacrificing some fish to cycle your tank, or whether you would rather take science into your own hands, buy some ammonia for cheap, and do it without risking animals. I'm only going to be talking about fishless cycling here because it's the only one I believe is really necessary. We're in 2024, there's no reason to be risking animals' lives when you could just buy a $5 bottle of ammonia. I'm going to do a part 2 where I go more into dosing ammonia and using test kits, but for now, just to summarize. To start a fishless cycle using your ammonia, you're going to need to find the right dosage to get your tank testing at up to 4 ppm ammonia. You don't want more than that. You don't really want less than 3. You should be keeping a daily note of what your parameters are at. After a few times of doing this, you should have a pretty good idea of how much your tank will take to dose to keep it up. Keep doing the same thing. Dose that ammonia up to 4, check again the next day. Now, after a couple of weeks of this, your beneficial bacteria colony will be growing. It will be going through the ammonia a bit faster. This ammonia won't just be disappearing, it'll be turning into nitrites. So as you start seeing the ammonia going down, you should start seeing the nitrites going up. The next step after nitrites is they will start turning into nitrates. Around the time when your nitrites are starting to turn into nitrates, your aquarium might start getting a little bit foggy. This is completely normal and it will clear up as the nitrites go away. Now, after some time in this stage, you will start seeing your ammonia and nitrites disappearing within a day or two. Keep dosing that ammonia up to 4 every day while you run what's called the 3-day test. To pass the 3-day test, your aquarium is going to need to cycle the ammonia you're adding into nitrite into nitrates within 24 hours for 3 days. This means you're going to dose your ammonia up to 4 parts per million and watch it and the nitrites go down to 0 parts per million every day for 3 days. If you pass this test, then congratulations, your tank is cycled. Your nitrates will probably be pretty high at this point, so you'll want to do a good sized water change, 50 to 80% even, to water that down. Again, don't touch your filter media, don't scrub anything in the tank. Once the axolotl's moved into its cycled tank, you can stop dosing ammonia since it'll take care of that for you. You should keep testing the parameters regularly though, just to ensure that everything's going smoothly. A new cycle can suffer some parameter spikes, so just keep an eye on that. If you do end up with any weird parameter spikes or a crash cycle, you're going to want to tub your axolotl until you can get your tank back in order. Tubbing an axolotl is basically the process of keeping an axolotl in a shoebox size or larger tub of Tupperware with a lid and bubbler and dechlorinated water that is changed every day, and it's only meant to be a temporary solution. Now, nitrates are the end of this cycle. That's why we do our water changes. So, you're going to want to do a water change anytime your nitrates get to 40 parts per million or more. You can speed up the fishless cycling process by seeding media. And so if you've ever tempered chocolate, you might be able to grasp this concept faster, similar to seeding chocolate to temper it. Basically, if you get some dirty media from an already cycled aquarium, from say a fish keeper friend or a pet store, many of them will be willing to sell you seeded media. This is basically just dirty media from their tank with a colony of bacteria already in it. If you put that into your tank, it can kind of kickstart that colony. Just keep in mind to keep that media wet in the transition between that tank and yours to keep the bacteria alive. With enough seeded media, you can cycle an aquarium very fast. There are some people that sell and will ship you seeded media. I'm not so sure how much I would trust that though. And so there you go, a big, slightly disorganized nitrogen cycle info dump. I hope that you learned something, and I hope that you come back for next week where I will dig into more on this topic.